Episode 15, Feeling Pinkie Keen. For this episode, Twilight once again takes over the reins of main character, and like with Ghostbusters, it starts with her and Spike practicing her magic. I'm Count Lurchlot, and this is Lukewarm Television. However, the focus is constantly being interrupted by Pinkie Pie. She's wearing an umbrella on her head and acting like something is about to fall from the sky. They inquire into what she's doing. Pinkie explains her tail is twitching, which according to her Pinkie sense means that something is about to fall from the sky. At first, Twilight thinks Pinkie believes it's going to rain, but Twilight learns that Pinkie wasn't referring to rain when a frog hits Twilight in the face. Turns out the frog was dropped by Fluttershy, who was helping relocate frogs from an overpopulated pond. Twilight then decides to go continue her practice. At this point, Spike expresses how amazing it is that Pinkie was able to predict something would fall. However, Twilight writes this off as a coincidence. But then Pinkie returns, her tail twitching again and insisting something else is going to fall. Twilight again doesn't believe this, but then she falls into a ditch because, turns out, she was the thing that was going to fall. Applejack appears and inquires into why Twilight is in a ditch. Spike clarifies it's because Pinkie predicted it, but Twilight still thinks this is nothing more than a coincidence. However, upon hearing that Pinkie's tail was twitching, Applejack becomes horrified, thinking something is about to fall. But thankfully, Spike is able to calm her down after explaining that Pinkie's tail is no longer twitching. Twilight asks if Applejack really believes this. Applejack confirms that while it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, those in Ponyville have come to accept that if Pinkie's tail is twitching, you better listen. Pinkie then reappears to say her ears are flopping. Spike asks what that means, but Pinkie only responds with she'll run a bath for Twilight, but then a pony with a cart runs by and splashes her with mud, proving again that Pinkie was correct. While getting cleaned, Pinkie explains more of her Pinkie sense to Twilight about how she gets different little feelings that mean different things. If her back gets itchy, it's a lucky day, but if her knee gets pinchy, it means something scary is about to happen. She then says that her shoulder is currently achy, which means there's an alligator in the tub. This might sound silly, but it's true. Twilight asks why her knee didn't get pinchy because that's scary and dangerous. In real life, I would agree, but not in this instance, and you'll see why. This is Pinkie's pet alligator Gummy that has no teeth, and she should be very glad he has no teeth because he bites her a lot. Twilight still refuses to believe the special power stuff, thinking it's nothing but mumbo jumbo. Pinkie then counters with that Twilight does magic, what's not to believe and what's the difference? Twilight explains that magic is something you study and practice. It only happens when you decide to do it. Unlike Pinkie, who doesn't choose or control her Pinkie sense. But then Pinkie counters that sometimes it's a bunch of random things happening to her body at random times that predict the future. She refers to these as combos. She explains that if she has an ear flop, knee twitch, and eye flutter, that means they're about to see a beautiful rainbow. Twilight still refuses to believe this, but Pinkie then has an ear flop, eye flutter, and knee twitch, which results in Twilight getting slammed by an opening door. Twilight is initially confused by this, since she thought that combo meant rainbow. But if you remember, Pinkie said ear flop, knee twitch, and eye flutter meant rainbow. Well, this time, she had an ear flop, eye flutter, then a knee twitch. This means look out for opening doors. Twilight still can't bring herself to believe this. Pinkie then states that maybe Twilight doesn't believe this because she can't understand it. This gives Twilight the idea to hook Pinkie up to some crazy machine. She explains that the next time Pinkie has a twitch, they'll have all the scientific data they need to prove if this is true or not. Unfortunately, Pinkie is suddenly having no more twitches. Pinkie points out that she doesn't control it, they just come and go. Twilight points out that that makes no sense, but Pinkie feels that sometimes you just have to believe in things even when they don't make sense. But Twilight refuses to believe in anything she can't explain. Pinkie then feels something, but turns out it was just her stomach because she was hungry. Now frustrated, Twilight says to just forget it because she doesn't need to know and she doesn't care how this works. Pinkie is surprisingly okay with this, so they start to leave, but then she has another prediction of a bad opening door. Of course, Twilight is skeptical, but of course, Pinkie was right. While I could understand the front of the library, I'm thinking Spike should just knock before randomly barging through doors. This makes Twilight even more determined to figure out how this works, which leads to easily my favorite part of this episode because it reminds me a lot of the Looney Tunes show. This leads to Twilight and Spike following Pinkie like they're on a safari. I also think this is another good example for my argument on Twilight being autistic, because she stubbornly refuses to believe something she doesn't understand, and has become completely obsessed and focused with this topic, something I myself have done countless times throughout my life. Pinkie goes on the move, and they continue to follow her. They stop and see her playing in the grass near the Ponyville school, where she gets an itchy nose and ducks for cover. Twilight thinks she's worried about something falling, and feels this doesn't make any sense, because a twitchy tail is supposed to mean something is falling from the sky. Little does Twilight know, an itchy nose wasn't an indication of something falling, it was to indicate bees were around. Spike notices this, but Twilight doesn't, and she comedically faces the consequences. Like I said, this scene reminds me a lot of the Looney Tunes show because there's a lot of slapstick in it. Next, they observe her at Sweet Apple Acres, where they see her have the combo of look out for opening doors. This makes Spike worry about the barn door they're standing next to. Then Twilight is able to prove that there is nothing to worry about. Again though, she doesn't seem to understand that this wasn't the door Pinkie's combo was talking about. A cellar door opens and Twilight again faces Looney Tune consequences. Turns out this was Applejack's new apple cellar. Despite being injured to the point that she needs a wheelchair, Twilight continues in her obsessive quest. Again, I feel this intense obsession is a clear indication of Twilight's autism. They witness Pinkie's tail twitching, and Spike immediately ducks for cover. Twilight is of course skeptical, but then we get the most Looney Tunes scene of the episode as she's bombarded by multiple objects that fall from a moving van in the sky. Also, these ponies might want to consider finding a safer way to move heavy boxes, or at least invest in a door for the back of this thing. Pinkie then runs into Applejack, who inquires on what she's doing. We learn here that Pinkie knew Twilight was following her the whole time. She didn't say anything because she didn't want to ruin the secret. This angers Twilight, who seems to have healed enough since the last scene to walk again. Guess she used magic to heal all her broken bones. As someone who watches a lot of anime, that doesn't seem too strange. Pinkie then has a reaction she's never had before. She doesn't know what this means. All she knows is that it's a doozy and that something completely unexpected will happen. She does somehow know that it's going to happen at Froggy Bottom Bog. How she knows this, I have no idea. Maybe she has another sense that works like a compass, and that's where it's pointing. Knowing that's where Fluttershy is, they decide to head there to see if she's okay. We then see Fluttershy releasing the frogs. At first it appears that nothing is wrong, but something dangerous appears to be looming. They arrive at their destination and it appears to be empty. They call out for Fluttershy, but there is no response. And despite all the tension of this scene, they find Fluttershy unharmed and okay. Twilight then decides to be petty and gloats about how there was nothing to worry about, but we quickly see that might not be the case. Twilight then continues to gloat about how she is right, and for some reason she's completely ignoring all the smoke around her that's causing her to cough. Thankfully, everyone else notices the danger before she does. This could be another example of Twilight's autism, as she's too caught up in what she's doing to notice what's happening around her. Thankfully, Spike is finally able to get her to look behind herself, where she finally sees what they were all terrified of. I don't know what this is. I'm going to assume it's a Hydra, because it reminds me of the one I saw in a Hercules cartoon. They then confirm what I said about this being a Hydra. However, no one cares, and they decide to just bolt out of there. Can't blame them, I probably would have started running before the creature appeared. The Hydra continues to chase them, as it seems very content on eating them. I'd argue why Fluttershy doesn't try to just fly away, but I guess that would put her in greater danger because she'd have to fly past the heads. That, and she probably doesn't want to abandon her friends, which I respect her for. They come to a cliff, and their only hope of escape is to jump on the small spaces between the sides. This is interrupted by a pretty funny scene of Spike asking Twilight if she can just turn the Hydra into a rodent. Sadly, that is not a power Twilight possesses. Fluttershy goes first and manages to bravely jump across. I will say it here though, you're a Pegasus, Fluttershy, just fly across. Twilight stays behind to distract the Hydra while the others cross. This leads to one of her less intellectual moments as she decides to charge the Hydra head on. However, this works out better than expected as she manages to distract it long enough for the rest of them to cross the cliff. She starts running back to them, but the Hydra is closing in fast. Then all hope seems lost as the Hydra breaks the way across the cliff. The rest of them advise Twilight to jump. With her options exhausted, Twilight does it. Unfortunately, she can't jump far enough to make it. She starts falling into the water below, but then a giant bubble manages to bounce her back to her friends. I thought the Looney Tune escapades were done for this episode. The friends celebrate and Twilight finally feels Pinkie may have been right, but then Pinkie shudders again, showing that wasn't the doozy her Pinkie sense was referring to. Twilight then has a mental breakdown as she can't comprehend how that wasn't the doozy. Pinkie can't give an explanation, angering Twilight further, who then turns into a Super Saiyan. After calming down, Twilight finally concedes defeat. She confesses that while she can't explain how it works, the Pinkie sense makes sense. Just because she doesn't understand it doesn't mean it isn't true, leading her to admit that she believes in the Pinkie sense. Pinkie then shudders out of control before eventually stopping. Turns out, the doozy that was gonna happen was Twilight believing. I gotta admit, that is very funny. After all that, the doozy was simply her believing in something she can't explain. Then again, considering how stubborn Twilight is, it does make sense. We then return to Twilight's library, where she asks Spike to take a letter as she writes the lesson for this episode. Spike has trouble focusing though, as Twilight has now fully embraced Pinkie's philosophy, as Pinkie's tail is twitching and she doesn't want to risk it. The lesson for this episode is that sometimes there are things in this world you simply can't explain, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not true. It just means you have to choose whether or not you believe in them, and that sometimes it's a friend who shows you the way. We then learn that the object that was going to fall was Princess Celestia, who for some reason has come to receive the message in person. If I'm honest, it was hard for me to come up with my own takeaway from this episode. While the message is clear, I had a bit of difficulty applying that to real life. The best I could come up with is how sometimes you have to respect other people's beliefs, even if you don't believe in them yourself. I myself was raised religious, but I've always done my best to respect the beliefs of others, no matter how different they are from my own. That's the only real connection I can see here. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next review.